We're going to watch a little video. Okay, it's eye candy. Shoot me, you know, whatever. No, that'll be at the very end of the very last one. All right, so yes, no sound is, the sound of silence is the best. So we're going to watch a little video just as a warm-up before we jump off in the deep end, into the deep end of the pool in a few minutes. Where are we? Are we able to dim? Yeah. Josh, we are on the Mount of Olives. In fact, you can see that still today, thank you, that's much better. You can see olive trees on the Mount of Olives. Amazing. Okay, so in between the Mount of Olives and the, what is this? The Temple Mount? Yeah. In between the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount is a valley that the Bible calls Kidron or Kidron, K-I-D-R-O-N, the Kidron Valley. Like when David is running from his son Absalom, it says he crossed the Kidron Valley. And at John chapter 18, Jesus basically imitating his forefathers' movements. It says after the Last Supper that Jesus went across the Kidron Valley. It says that in John. No, it doesn't say that. It does. Trust me, we've just learned to skip over it over these years. Now, forever and a day, we won't be skipping that stuff anymore. So, Mount of Olives, this deep gorge here, created by erosion, Kidron Valley, and then the Temple Mount, and then biblical Jerusalem is, in David's day, goes down like this. This is the city of David. And in Jesus' day, goes around like this. The rest of this stuff, that's modern Jerusalem. Lacey and I, our little boy Jacob, we lived over in southwest Jerusalem. It's the reason for our southern accents. You saw what I did with that, right? Okay, so let's take like little Einsteins, take a little trip on our rocket ship. It's so fun to do. Satellite's one thing, but aerial video is a whole other thing. For example, here you can see St. Anne's Church, and these are the pools of Bethesda. The pools of Bethesda, which we visit when we're there. You've got the Golden Gate there, and you've got St. Stephen's Gate there. Here's where the Antonia Fortress was, for anybody that is interested in that area of study. This is the northern wall of modern Jerusalem. The area where we are now, we're right, didn't see it, but we're flying right now, right over top of what is called the Garden Tomb that is preferred by Protestants. The two gray domes, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, or Church of the Resurrection is what Eastern Orthodox or Greek Orthodox call it. Okay, here's where the wall turns and goes south. This is Notre Dame right here. We do something at Notre Dame, right?
Yes, stop for a second, right there.
Okay, I think I might have just killed it, but...
Yes, Notre Dame is where there's going to be a rooftop evening meal, I believe, overlooking the city.
Okay. So let's fast forward to Notre Dame. There was something that I missed that I wanted to show. Stop right here. Are you kidding me? Yeah. Learn your equipment. All right. Let's play. Okay, Josh, this is the Herodian right here. That's Bethlehem. You can see Bethlehem from where we are, and we're on the north side of the city. All right, so we continue on. Church of the Holy Sepulchre here. All this is inside the city wall. This is what's called the Old City of Jerusalem. There's your Temple Mount, Mount of Olives. Now you're seeing the Judean wilderness or the wilderness of Judah there. In just a second, we're going to see the Mount of Olives. You're picking it up. This is the Russian Orthodox Convent of the Ascension there. It marks the location, traditional location of the Ascension. Is the Western Wall right there. I'm going to stop for just a second here. All right. This is Jaffa Gate. This is the main entrance into the old city, especially from the west. Now you also find 3 war towers. 1, 2, 3. These are at the top now, they're like Crusader and Turkish period stones, but down at the bottom, there are Herodian stones laid there by King Herod the Great to defend the northern approach to his castle. And his castle starts here and goes all the way down like this. You'll see the whole thing in just a moment. It's been fully excavated, and Lacey and I were actually there during a part of the excavation, picked up some of the stuff that the excavators discarded. This is where they were throwing the dirt over the wall and the discard. All of this is Herod the Great's palace area. Gigantic palace there. Mount of Olives again on the horizon. Here's the Dormition Abbey. This, according to Roman Catholic tradition, this is where Mary fell asleep and was taken up into heaven. Yeah, it's in 2nd Hezekiah 17, somewhere around there. Again, the 2 gray domes are the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Sorry about the jiggled camera, but I wasn't there. There again is the Western Wall and the Western Wall Plaza. Here's the pinnacle of the temple right here that Satan took Jesus. This whole area is full of markets, full of people all the time. It was, hey, make a public show of this, you know. Get some real pop for your shekel here. So, pinnacle of the temple. We have an inscription down here that identifies it that was found by archaeologist Benjamin Mazar in the 1960s. Okay, these are the original steps leading into a gate here. There's another gate there. That's the way that normally you entered the temple, was from the south. These are the steps that Jesus taught on, the steps that other great rabbis like Gamaliel, Paul's teacher, taught from there. Now we're on the southeast corner, and this is an Islamic or Muslim graveyard here. This is the area that was underneath, that was illegally excavated, and 400 dump truck loads were trucked out of the Temple Mount and dumped in the Kidron Valley that Dr. Barkai has been sifting through bucket by bucket. Okay, right here's the Golden Gate. We call it, in the Bible, it's called the Eastern Gate, like in the book of Ezekiel. And now the Temple Mount straight on from the east looking west. If you keep going this way, you get to us. Church of the Holy Sepulchre here, and the Golden Gate there, and St. Stephen's Gate just off the picture to the lower right. And I get a little bit of a perspective on here again. Now it's coming up St. Anne's Church, and we're back where we started with the pools of Bethesda. So good enough for that? Because we're going to go on to now the Sea of Galilee. We did the Sea of Galilee in our flyover on the satellite stuff, right? And we approached from the north. We're going to do that same thing right now. This is the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. Just off the screen here is a little fishing village called Bethsaida, currently under archaeological excavation. And then right here is Capernaum. They're within walking distance, just about 3 miles apart. Bethsaida, where Peter and Andrew originally, where Philip and Nathanael, and presumably some of Jesus' other disciples had their homes, at least at one point. And then Jesus' base of operations over here at Capernaum. I wrote an article, I don't know, it's about 5 years ago. Why would a carpenter choose fishermen as his disciples? It's online, it's free. That's one of those things that, it's like, what kind of person would that question even occur to, right? That's the person you're dealing with up here today. But it leads to some absolutely fascinating discoveries. This is what I found watching Columbo. Ask the right question, you get the right answer. So part of reading your Bible, becoming a more literate reader of Scripture is sort of, reading with all eyes open, both eyes open, and learning to ask the right questions. So let's do a little flying around the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. We'll return to this area later and get a close-up of Capernaum, but we're migrating to the east. These are the Golan Heights. This is the eastern shore and the Gentile side in Jesus' day of the Sea of Galilee. Now it opens up to a big plain. It's called the Plain of Bethsaida because Bethsaida itself is in that clump of eucalyptus trees right here. Friends of mine are involved in excavating that. And so you also see the upper Jordan River. Do you see it? Following the pointer, snaking around and then dumping into the Sea of Galilee. Where does the Sea of Galilee get most of its waters? From the northern Jordan River. So I thought there was only one Jordan. There's actually a Jordan A and a Jordan B. What divides the two is the Sea of Galilee, this 13-mile long strip of lake that we've got there. So a close-up of the upper Jordan River, not the mighty Mississippi, right? Now, this is an Old Testament site. People used to think this was Bethsaida, but it's actually the archaeological excavation has uncovered extensive Old Testament period ruins and very few New Testament artifacts. Maybe somebody was camping out or had a fish fry or something like that up there in the New Testament time and left a couple of shekels behind an arrowhead or whatever. But it's basically an Old Testament site. This is Old Testament Geshur, G-E-S-H-U-R. It's the home of the mother of Absalom, the one who almost tipped the kingdom in his favor in the book of 2 Samuel. All right, so now we move on to some heavy lifting. Are you ready for that? Done with eye candy for just a bit, but I think you're ready. You had your coffee, used the bathroom, gotten used to my accent. Okay, so I put this presentation together after years and years, semester after semester, being asked by pastors, youth sponsors, concerned parents, folks who've sent their kids off to state university and they've come back for Thanksgiving or Christmas with all kinds of weird ideas and stories that they picked up in their religion class or world religions class or whatever. The internet is full of websites, the goal of which is to disprove that Jesus even existed, that he wasn't real. He's a composite figure or figment of somebody's, pious imagination or whatever, but he's not a really real person. So people were asking me, is there any ancient evidence outside the Bible? You can't use the Bible to prove the Bible. So outside of the Bible to prove that Jesus existed, and maybe, hoping against hope, there might be some connection between what the Bible says he said and did and what any ancient sources outside the Bible say that he said and did. Any kind of relation. Is there any evidence for our faith? I actually wrote an article called Faith and Evidence, Enemies or Allies. That might be something that you'd want to take a look at. In fact, we just celebrated Easter, and I did a video on evidence for Easter. So that's something that you might want to take a look at if you're especially masochistic, just want to beat up on yourself. So is there anything that we've got that can come close to demonstrating that Jesus existed and that he was who the Bible says that he was? So we basically have, like we have 4 biblical gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We have 4 versions of gospel stuff in our world left today. We've got the stuff that was being preached and taught in the book of Acts. You hear the sermons and speeches. That's like word videos of what people were proclaiming about Jesus. So there's one piece of evidence. We have another, the 4 written Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Then we have stuff outside the Bible. Some of this stuff aligns with the Bible. We call that Orthodox. And some of this stuff is heresy. And it greatly departs from the biblical perspective of Jesus. On this third point, I've written an article. It was quite a while ago. Wow. It was like over a decade ago. Will the real Jesus please stand up? Some of you may remember the game show. You know, what's my line? Right? Will the real astronaut please stand up? Okay, so it wasn't a takeoff on Eminem's song. I promise. Didn't have that in mind. It's just comparing the biblical Gospels with the stuff outside the Bible that we hear about in the Da Vinci Code, the movie and the book and stuff like that. So we're not going to address that. That's written much later after the New Testament and by Christians or quasi-Christians. So that's what we want to look at is stuff that's happening right at the flashpoint of New Testament reality. That is this fourth one, the fourth version of our gospel that we get. And I call this the gospel of public domain or the gospel of marketplace. What are people saying about Jesus, like in popular literature and stuff like that, outside the Bible? That's what we're going to be looking at this morning. The gospel of public domain. What's the nature of this stuff? First of all of these sources are non-Christian. I didn't choose Christian authors to try to demonstrate the historicity of Jesus. That would kind of be defeating the point, right? So those are ruled out. So non-Christians, all but 2 of these sources that we're going to look at today are anti-Christian. They're not even neutral. They're anti-Christian. We're looking at literary evidence. We're looking at archaeology. We're looking at 1st and early 2nd century. In other words, people who are living through the apostolic period. That's what we're looking at for this. And the stuff that they're bringing is pretty obviously, they're not quoting the Gospel of Matthew. They're not quoting the Gospel of John. This is stuff that's out there. The popular word is scuttlebutt. It's just he said, she said, kind of hearsay sort of stuff. But it's really cool because we're hearing in this material a version of the Jesus story that we don't get from our biblical stuff. What are non-Christians saying about the Christian message and about the focus of the Christian message, which is who is the person of Jesus of Nazareth? First one, we've got a 1st century source. This is Flavius Josephus or Josephus Flavius. He's a 1st century Jewish author who was a contemporary of the apostles and was writing at the same time the New Testament was being written. I would call that a good source, wouldn't you? 1st century source. And this is what Josephus says. And by the way, some people complain, well, yeah, but that stuff was copied by scribes and they added words and they changed stuff and they put this stuff in. This is not the Greek. This doesn't go through the Greek scribal tradition. This is an Arabic text. This comes from the Arabic. So we're not, I get this all the time in emails and stuff like that. I don't even I just say, hey, I'm not even using Greek manuscripts. I'm using Arabic. So at this time, there was a wise man who was called Jesus. His conduct was good. You know, he went about doing good and healing all of those who were sick and oppressed of the devil. We hear about this in the Bible. His conduct was good. He was known to be virtuous. Many from among the Jews and other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to die, condemned him to be crucified and to die. Is that what we're getting in the Bible? That's exactly what we get in the Bible. Josephus never became a Christian. He was a traditional, observant Jew the rest of his entire life. Probably not safe. All right. This is still Josephus. Those who became his disciples. Oh, this guy had disciples? What kind of person has disciples? There's only one person. Sadducees didn't have disciples. Essenes didn't have disciples. Zealots didn't have disciples. These apocalyptic groups, they didn't have disciples. There's only one group of people, and that is rabbis. Rabbis have disciples. They're their students. They're rabbis in training, whatever. So this is, again, telling us, yes, Jesus had disciples. These were his learners, his understudies. They reported that he appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion. You ever heard that story before? I don't know, like maybe last week. And that he was alive. Now, he's not checking off on this and saying, yeah, this absolutely happened. But the earliest generation of Christians was saying that Jesus was crucified by Pontius Pilate, that he was buried, that he rose from the dead on the third day. You don't even have to have the Bible anymore because we've got Josephus to establish those things as historical realities. First century proclaimers of Jesus are talking about this. You know, we don't talk about this a whole lot in church these days. But this, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, is the essence. It's the foundation. It's the crux, pun intended. It's the crux of our faith. Paul says if this stuff didn't happen, then we're still in our sins. And we're of all people most miserable. And we're misrepresenting God if those things didn't really happen. I think it ought to be talked about all the time. I've been to some church services where it wasn't even talked about on Easter. Not sure what that was about, but whatever. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders. The Hebrew for that is niflaot. It basically means signs, miracles. So he's saying that he may have been the Messiah, and he may be the one that the prophets were talking about would come and work miracles. That sounds like the Jesus of the Gospels, right? Let's press on. We've got another text from Josephus. It's in a different book, Antiquities. It comes in 20 books, and this is the last one. So we're in AD 62. We're fully within the New Testament period, whatever in the world that is. But we're in the middle of the first century. AD 62 is the year. Ananias, he's called Ananias in Acts, in the book of Acts, thought that he had a favorable opportunity because the Roman governor had died and the next one hadn't come yet, hadn't arrived on the scene. When he got there, he'd have boat lag. All right, never mind. And so he convened the judges of the Sanhedrin. We know about Sanhedrin, right? Same Sanhedrin that Stephen was tried by. Yes? Okay. He brought before the Sanhedrin. This is the sort of like the Supreme Court of Israel at the time. They meet in the Temple Mount. And brought before them a man named James, the brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ. Wow! All of that stuff's in the Bible. James, this is the guy that Paul says is one of the pillars of the church. Acts says Acts 15, he's the leader of the church. He writes the book of James. Now we are going to get some stuff that the Bible doesn't even tell us about James. He accused them of transgressing the law and delivered them up to be stoned. This James, who according to Mark chapter 3, this James and the rest of Jesus' family thought that he had lost his mind. Came to take, quote, I'm quoting, came to take custody of him, thinking that he had lost his senses. The Greek says he's outside of himself. He lost his mind. He goes from thinking Jesus was crazy to not being willing to denounce him, and so he ends up being martyred for his brother. That's some pretty serious faith going on right there, and that's a major transformation from he's nuts to he's king, he's God, he's Messiah, and he's my master, and I won't deny him even on pain of death. That's a major trajectory, life trajectory change going on with this guy named James. Well, not only that, but we have a little over 2,000 of these things. They're called bone boxes or ossuaries. You've seen them already. And after the body decays, then the bones are collected together. You know, the body says, and he was gathered to his fathers. You ever hear that language in the Bible? That's literal. That's not some kind of metaphorical. Your body rots in about a year, and they come back, and in a second stage of burial, you gather the bones together. Well, in the first century, instead of throwing them over in a pit, literally being gathered to your fathers, you were put in one of these bone boxes called an ossuary. And this one happens to have an inscription. Can anybody see it right there? You can see that there's some incisions in the rock there. This is soft limestone, so it's easy to inscribe. And you can see it blown up here. Easy to read in Hebrew, but I've put a kind of a transliteration, not a transliteration, but an artist rendition of it. In Hebrew, it starts with a yod. Yaakov bar means Jacob, the son of. Jacob is really the biblical James. There are no Jameses in the Bible. Anytime you see James, it's always in Greek and in Hebrew, the original languages, it's always Yaakov or Jacob. All right? So Jacob or James, the son of Yosef, there's this word right here, Yosef. Jacob, the son of Joseph. Does that correspond? Okay. And then, Ahui de Yeshua, the brother of Jesus. De Yeshua, the brother of Jesus. James, the son of Joseph, the carpenter. And this James is also the brother of Jesus. So we don't just have it in literature, we have it in archaeology. Jesus, Yeshua, Yeshua. And, by the way, since we're dealing with ossuaries, kind of like a really small sarcophagus, we also have this one. And this is very ornate. It's not rough like the other one, probably from a poor person. This is somebody that's got some jack, somebody that's way up on the food chain. And we also have a homemade, home-cooked inscription on the side, and it says Yosef, there's that same word, bar, like bar mitzvah. You know that word, right? Bar mitzvah, bar Jonah, bar Nabas, bar Jesus. Lots of bar guys running around in the Bible. Bar Timaeus, the blind man. It isn't Bartimaeus, it's Bar Timaeus, son of Timaeus. Okay, so this one says Yosef bar Kepha, Joseph, the son of Caiaphas. This is what Josephus says, the full name of Caiaphas, the high priest who turned Jesus over to the Romans. This is we have that guy's basically bone box. We've got his casket. The stuff in the Bible, again, is not make-believe. It's not pretend. It isn't legendary or mythical. It is hardcore, evidentially based stuff. Really neat stuff.
Wait, that's in the museum, right?
That's in the Israel, both of those are in the Israel Museum, exactly.
Which we'll get you to see.
Which is a lot of fun to visit. They have so much stuff you could spend your entire trip just there and not exhaust it all. All right, Thales. Thales wrote a book on the history of the world, basically, in multiple volumes, and it perished in ancient times, in antiquity. But sometimes Thales is quoted, like by Sextus Julius Africanus, who wrote a little bit later. Thales is writing in the year AD 55, right in the middle of Paul's ministry. This is about the time he's writing the books of 1st and 2nd Corinthians, right? In the third book of his histories, Thales calls this darkness that occurred at the time of Jesus' crucifixion an eclipse of the sun, which to this guy, to Sextus, seems to be wrong. And we get this eclipse mentioned in Mark 15 and parallels in Matthew and Luke. It's that darkness that came over the earth at 3 p.m., right at the time that Jesus dies. So an interesting first century reference to the crucifixion of Jesus and the darkness that took place at that time. What Sextus is disagreeing with, was that the darkness was caused by an eclipse. Not that it happened, but the reason for it happening. Does that make sense to you? Okay, another text. This comes to us in Aramaic from a guy named Mara. Mara's writing to his son, and he says, What advantage did the Jews gain by killing their wise king? Well, you guys know that they're under Roman rule in Jesus' day, and they don't have literally a king, you know, like a crown and a throne and a palace and all that stuff. So who's he talking about? Because their kingdom was taken away at that time. It's 66 to 70, first Jewish revolt, destruction of Jerusalem, destruction of the temple, enslavement of over 100,000 people, death of more than 100,000 more. Socrates is not dead because of Plato. Why is that? Plato was his student, right? Nor is the wise king because of the new teachings that he laid down. Who in the world would that be? I know of people in academics that take issue with the identification. He's talking about Jesus. What in the world? Who else could it be? Pliny the Younger. He is a Roman governor of the province of Bithynia, place where Paul wanted to visit, but the Spirit, according to Acts 16, hindered him, prevented him from going there, instead directed him into the area of Macedonia, where the great churches of Philippi and Thessaloniki and Berea were founded. God had a plan. Paul had one, God had another one, and God's was better. Surprise, surprise, right? That's totally not applicable to your life. You're always right. It's always the other way. The flow is always the other way. I get that. Right? But Pliny says, Christians are in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before sunrise and reciting a hymn to Christ as God. Notice his dates. 1st century, early 2nd century. There's no evidence that Jesus ever existed. It's just all a myth. This is what our students are taught. This is what we've got to push back with. I'll argue it right here. This stuff ought to find its way into youth group. You better get this stuff into sophomores, juniors, and seniors before you send them off to so-and-so state university. Cornelius Tacitus, official Roman historian of the Caesars, had access to all the royal archives in the capital city of Rome. And Tacitus says in his Roman annals, Nero substituted as, you know about Nero, right? He was the crazy one, one of the crazy ones. Substituted as culprits and punished in the most unusual ways those hated for their shameful acts, whom the crowd called Christianoi. What does that sound like? You translate as Latin? Christians, yeah. The OI is just plural. The founder of this name, Christ, found it again, this time in official Roman records, not some Jew down in the land of Israel, Josephus, not just some letter some guy wrote to his son, Mara, etc., but this is official Roman historical material. The founder of this name, Christ, had suffered the extreme penalty. That's a euphemism for... Yes, exactly. And since Seneca and Cicero, they taught the Romans, a proper Roman should never even have the word crucifixion pass his lips. So you come up with these, cute little ways, like he went to his eternal reward. He died, right? The euphemistic kind of approach to communication. He suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. Come on, guys. This could be Bible. It's ripped straight out of the pages of the Gospels. Suppressed for a time, the deadly superstition erupted again, not only in Judea, the origin of this evil, but also in the city of Rome, where all things horrible and shameful from everywhere come together and become popular. He's talking about your faith. Where all things horrible and shameful come together and become popular. So, these Christianoi, these spiritual ancestors of you and me, were covered with the skin. You hear this in sermons. We've heard this in Sunday school and stuff. We've heard this referred to. We're now reading the literal words. And yeah, by the way, I gave you the exact reference. I believe in that. I see on Christian TV all the time. Well, the early rabbis, Jewish rabbis in Jesus' day taught blah, 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 blah. And they never cite a source. They never give you a specific reference. And every time I've ever checked, it's always been wrong. Every time. There's never been an exception. Every time they've been incorrect. So we got to be careful with our sources. That's the reason why it's not just that, AR, it's not just the university coming out of me, but it's, you deserve it. You deserve the evidence. So they were covered with skins of wild animals, torn to death by dogs, or they were crucified, and then when the day ended, they were burned as torches. These are our roots, guys. These are our spiritual ancestors. Suetonius, another Roman historian, but he's more like the guy who writes the cheesy paperback books that on the cheap shelf at Walmart, with the guy and the girl on the park bench, this is what Suetonius is writing. Cornelius Tacitus is writing official Roman history. He's writing the more popularized version of Tacitus. Claudius expelled the Jews from Rome. We know about this in AD 49. It's mentioned in Acts 18. That's the reason why when Paul meets these Roman Jews, Aquila and Priscilla, he doesn't meet them in Rome. He meets them in Corinth. What happened there? They got deported. They were run out of Rome in AD 49 by what is called the letter of Claudius. They were always making disturbances, that Jewish community in the capital city of Rome, because of the instigator Chrestus. That's that Christianoi. Remember we saw that in Tacitus? Now we get it again in Suetonius. Christus, a common Latin misspelling of the Greek Christos. Suetonius further says, punishment was inflicted upon the Christiani, a class of people, this I right there, the belonging to Christ. Remember Caesarea Philippi, Caesarea belonging to Philip. So these are people, Christians belonging to Jesus. A class of people of a new and evil-doing superstition. There again, you get that kind of negative connotation in most of this literature that we will look at today. The word evil-doing superstition is actually more literally translated an unhealthy fear of demonic spirits. That's your faith and mine, y'all. Enjoy it. Billy Madison, cherish it. Never mind. Lucian of Samosata. He wrote a book called, notice dates, early 2nd century. The Death of Peregrineus is what he wrote. And this is what he says. Some guy that I don't even know about. I don't know where he maybe made this name up. Maybe it's a code word for something else. I don't know. But anyway, he's second only to the one that they still worship today. The man in Palestine who was crucified because he brought this new form of initiation into the world. Now, who could that be? Think on this. That first lawgiver of theirs persuaded them that they're all brothers. If your brother offends you, then turn the other cheek. If your brother takes you, that's Jesus language. They are all brothers the moment that they transgress and deny the Greek gods and begin worshiping that crucified teacher of wisdom is what philosophos means. So that teacher of wisdom and living by his laws. You tell me who else in antiquity that could mirror, represent, describe. Lucian's talking about Jesus. Celsus, early 2nd century, notice the dates of the writing of his true doctrine. Celsus was a pagan philosopher. And his works didn't survive, but they're cited in other people's works, like Origen of Caesarea in his Against Celsus. This is what he quotes Celsus as saying, early 2nd century. He fabricated the story of his birth from a virgin. Oh, wow. That's interesting. Came from a Jewish village. We just flew over it twice. I've forgotten the name of it, but you remember. And from a poor countrywoman, I'm not sure who that would be either. Maybe starts with an M. Who gained her substance by spinning. Now that's new. She was a spinstress. She was driven out by her husband who was, are you kidding me? That actually says that right there. Is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, yes, the carpenter? He was a carpenter by trade. When she was convicted of adultery and had a child by a soldier named Panthera, which is a play on words. The word Panthera means panther. It's where we get our word panther. But it's just, you're moving the letters around from the word Parthenos, like the Parthenon in Greece, the great religious structure. It's the place of the virgins. Parthenos means virgin. So she had a child by a soldier, and he becomes known as the son of the virgin. Oh, there's the virgin right there. As she had been driven out by her husband, that was the carpenter. I think you remember his name. While she was wandering disgracefully, she secretly bore Jesus. Okay, now we know who he's talking about. Because Jesus was poor, he hired himself out as a laborer in Egypt. This is all spin. But do we know that Jesus was ever even in Egypt? Yeah. Gospel of Matthew. Holy Family running from Herod because of his desire to kill Jesus as a baby, okay? And they end up in Egypt for a period of time. Some kind of way this gets out into the gospel of public domain, and all of a sudden out pops this interesting story. He hired himself out as a laborer in Egypt. There he learned certain magical powers which the Egyptians are proud to have. He returned full of pride in these powers, and he gave to himself the title of God. It's just what the Bible says. He came back from Egypt. An angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in Egypt, said, "Arise, take the child and his mother and return to the land of Israel. Those who sought the child's life are now dead." Yep, Matthew chapter 2. Graffito of more archaeology. Graffito is the singular for graffiti. We know that word. Okay? The graffiti of Alexamenos, some person. Those in the back, can you actually make a figure out? This is carved in the catacombs in Rome. Comes from around the year 125 AD. Can you make it out? Right? There's the head of a donkey right here. There's the body of a man right there, and it is superimposed on a T-shaped cross. And then there's an inscription down at the bottom. Are you able to make that out? Let's look at it from a little bit different angle with a little bit different lighting for the picture. The donkey's head, the T-shaped cross. You even have a crossbar where the feet are placed. You've then got the human torso and then an inscription. You even have the head of a human being right here, and that human being's body, and one of his hands is lifted up in worship. Wonder what this inscription reads. There's an artist rendition of the whole thing. Is it coming a little bit clearer? This is Greek, and Greek shares, we get a lot of the form of our letters from, like, there's an alpha, and there's an epsilon, right? The A and E, that this is the L. Looks more like a Hebrew L than an English L, but that's whatever. Okay, translation, anybody? 125 AD, catacombs in Rome. Alexamenos worships his gods. It's actually plural, theoi, instead of theos, because this person is a pagan. He's making fun of this guy. He's worshiping a crucified guy with a donkey head. Not a friend of Christianity, right? And yet he's testifying to, in Rome, the other end of the empire, Jesus is declared as being worshipped as God. Now, we're told by the Da Vinci Code that didn't start happening until AD 325. Well, he didn't miss it but by 200 years. Just a couple of centuries. What, a couple of centuries between friends, right? No, we're looking for truth. We're looking for reality. Jesus wasn't declared to be God by some late church council. Jesus was worshipped as God from the very beginning. They were worshiping Jesus in the boat on the Sea of Galilee in his lifetime. Okay, now we get to the rabbis, and I'm going to kind of sort of hurry through this as much as I can, but we can't do this excursus of archaeology and Greek and Roman authors and pagan philosophers and stuff like that without looking at some of the stuff that the earliest rabbis were saying about Jesus. Rabbi Eliezer is from the time of Jesus. He's late 1st century, early 2nd century. It's taught that Rabbi Eliezer said to the wise men, the sages, the rabbis, did not Ben Stada bring spells from Egypt in a cut in his flesh? This is, Jesus is bringing magic back from Egypt. Get this, because this pervades rabbinic thought, what the rabbis think about Jesus. They have to come up with some kind of rationale to explain how he accomplished miraculous works, how he healed, how he exorcised demons, and how he rose from the dead. It's all attributed to illegitimate use of magical powers. Who is this Ben Stada? He's Ben Pantera. Ben means like Ben-Hur, Bin Laden, son of. It's Greek. The Hebrew is bar or ben. It's the same thing. Ben Stada is the son of the virgin, Ben Pantera. Rav Chisda says the husband was Stada and the lover was Pantera. The mother was Miriam, the dresser of women's hair. Now she's bivocational, y'all. By the way, this totally gives women license to spend as much time and as much money at the salon as you need to, because you've got it on good authority. It tracks back to the Holy Family. Miriam. Who would that? We call her today Mary. Okay. The Greek reads Marios, except in the Gospel of Luke. He preserves the original Hebrew form of the word. Marios, it's Mari with an A-S on the end. That's a Greek ending. So Mary is a nickname. It's kind of like we shorten Timothy to Tim or Jonathan to John, right? You shorten for nicknames, right? This was her. I know a number of modern day Israelis, and their nickname is Miri. M-I-R-I. What's that short for? Miriam. Look at this, Miriam. Do you know what Luke calls Mary? He never refers to her as Marios. He doesn't use the Greek version. He calls her Miriam, her original Hebrew name that tracks back to the sister of Moses. Is that cool? I think that's cool. That's Bible nerd me, but that's, to me, still cool. She was false to her husband. Bam. That's the same thing we got in Celsus. Now we're getting it in the rabbis. By the way, it's Celsus, not Celsius. You caught that, right? Okay. Another text. Jesus escaped to Egypt. Yes, he did. That's Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2. And a teacher has said, Jesus the Nazarene, this teacher, that's a technical term for in the earliest group of rabbis. As far as we can trace the tradition back in rabbinic history. That's a technical term there. A teacher has said, Jesus the Nazarene, we have both his name and we have where he's from. Nazareth or Nazareth. Practiced magic and led Israel astray. Whoops, because that's what'll get you stoned. It's not just telling false prophecies, saying something and it doesn't come to pass. That's not the way biblical time prophets were stoned. It was if you showed a sign or a wonder, according to Deuteronomy 13, and then used that to lead people astray. That's what the claim is against Jesus. That's why the Jewish authorities felt it was legitimate to charge him with a capital crime because he was using his miraculous works to, quote, lead Israel astray, a la Deuteronomy 13. We'll make this available just so you have all the references. Make all those things available. Those then will become available to you, and you can do homework until Jesus comes back with this stuff if you like. Okay, so the rabbis taught Jesus had 5 disciples. I struggled with this for years. Then I realized, hey, in rabbinic literature, this earliest stuff from the earliest rabbis that go back to and even before the time of Jesus, the greatest of the rabbis, people like Rabbi Akiva and Yochanan ben Zakkai, these guys, they always had 5 major disciples. So what they're doing is they're just patterning in their tradition of the Jesus story. They're patterning Jesus on the basis of the greatest rabbis of their day. If they always had 5, well, then Jesus must have had 5. They don't have access. They're not reading the Gospels. Clearly, there are 12, 13, if you count Judas' successor. But Jesus had 5 disciples. Well, at least they're saying he had disciples. That's what we're told by Josephus in the 1st century. What kind of person has disciples in the 1st century? A rabbi, yes. Right? We have one who's called Mattai. Can you figure out who that corresponds to in our Gospels? Pretty easy lifting, right? Matthew, exactly. It is a little bit more of a stretch. Nakai. Go beyond the 12. John 3. Came to Jesus at night. Nicodemus. Do you know that they know about Nakai? All over the place in rabbinic literature, it talks about this guy who's very well known, first century rabbi. His name is Nakdimon ben Gurion. Gives his whole name. Nakdimon, Nicodemus, ben, son of Gurion, whoever his dad was. And he was a really wealthy landholder in Galilee, in that Jezreel Valley area. So there's lots that we can know about this guy in John 3, Nicodemus, and Jesus says you must be born again, etc. Calls Jesus a teacher of Israel, or a teacher. So Nakai. Netzer is just probably a confusion with the word Natseret or Nazareth. Buni. Jesus calls the two brothers, James and John. He calls them sons of rage or sons of thunder. And in Hebrew, that's B'nai Regesh. Even in our Greek Gospels and in your English translations, it says somewhere where it calls them Boanerges. It's B'nai Regesh. It's sons of rage. You know, you want us to call thunder down, call fire down to consume these Samaritans? You remember that story? Okay, so Buni is probably a reflection of that. Todah just means thank you in Hebrew, and that's just weird. So by that point, they've run out of steam, run out of ammunition. One of the earliest rabbinic texts, it's called a Baraita, recounts an incident involving Ben Dama, son of Dama, and a snake biting. Following the attack, Yaakov of Kfar Sakanya, who was a heretic, this is according to the rabbis, he's actually an ancient follower of Jesus, a Jew, a Hebrew-speaking Jew living in Galilee. That's where Kfar means a village. Kfar Sakanya, a disciple of Jesus the Nazarene, came to treat this guy that got bit by the snake. Well, his brother-in-law, Rabbi Ishmael, said, no, I'm not going to let you treat him. But before Ben Dama could finish the statement, please let him come and heal me, his soul departed from his body and he died. Weird story, I get that, but it's talking about Jesus. So we include it in the presentation. Rabbi Eliezer said, one time I was walking in the upper marketplace of Tzipori. We'll see this on a video. It's the city of Sepphoris. I found a man who was one of the disciples of, bam, there it is again, Jesus the Nazarene. Well, clearly they're going to know where Jesus is from. Jesus, the person from Nazareth, because Sepphoris is 3.4 miles north of Nazareth. It's just on the next ridge north. And his name was the same guy, Yaakov of the village of Sakanya. He said, Jesus the Nazarene taught me this. We're going to get a teaching from Jesus that's not in our Bible, okay? So maybe it's a little bit R-rated, okay? And maybe it's not pure Bible. But there's this Jesus stuff floating around still, and the rabbis are citing it. Since coins of a prostitute's hire came from filth, this is what Jesus says, let them go to a place of filth and build a bathroom. This saying pleased me. Because of this, I was charged with heresy, because I accepted a teaching of Jesus. Some fascinating stuff. Beats the daylights out of the Da Vinci Code, which is all make-believe. Rabbi Yochanan said, in the beginning he was a prophet, in the end he was a diviner. He was a magician. Started out right and then had a real bad ending. Rabbi Papa said, this is what they say. Now he starts talking about Miriam or Mary. She was the descendant of princes and governors, but played the harlot with carpenters. You've got to get your licks in some kind of way. I want you to look at this. This corresponds perfectly with what we're told in our Gospels. It doesn't correspond, though, with what we have in our popular minds because we think Jesus died on Passover. No Passover lambs died on Passover. You sacrifice them the day before, from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Sometimes as many, according to Josephus, as 250,000 Passover lambs to serve all of the pilgrims who've come to Jerusalem to celebrate in any given year. They crucified him on the eve of Passover. That's when the Passover lambs, and then it becomes night and you consume the Passover lamb that's already been roasted and you eat it at the Passover Seder or supper, Jesus' Last Supper. They crucified him on the eve of Passover because he practiced magic and led Israel astray, enticed Israel to go astray. Well, so what is the end of Jesus according to the rabbis? Onkelos, we know who he was. He's actually 2nd century, had nothing to do with the historical Jesus. But they're just trying to come up with an explanation as to what happened and why, okay? He went and raised Jesus the Nazarene from the grave through divination, necromancy, illegitimate magic. This was his sin. He mocked the words of the sages, of the rabbis. This was Jesus' sin. He mocked the words of the rabbis. Now take a look at this one. Woe to him who makes himself alive by the name of God. In their minds, Jesus had brought back magical formulas from Egypt. Some kind of way, we're told in this literature, that he learned how to pronounce the divine name, the YHVH or YHWH, or in Hebrew Yod-He, Vav-He, or Yahweh or Yahweh. Some kind of way he had gotten that secret knowledge of how to pronounce it properly. And the rabbis taught that anybody that could ever do that would be able to use the power of that name, and it's in the name of Jesus, I command you to stand up and walk. It's under his authority. That's a powerful name. In the name of Yahweh, arise from the dead. And Jesus was then able to, some kind of way, resurrect himself. And this is simply saying it happened, but it happened illegitimately, according to these rabbis. That's some amazing stuff. We don't have to accept their explanation, but they're testifying to historical reality. So there was a guy named Jesus, and he was from a Jewish village. And I've cited the references to who says these things in that stuff we just looked at. His earthly father was a carpenter. His mother's name was Mary or Miriam. She was of royal or Davidic ancestry. We get this in the Gospels. His family was poor. His opponents said that Mary was unfaithful. We get this in John chapter 8. We know who our father is. You don't know who your father is. His opponents said that he was illegitimate. He claimed a virgin birth. He escaped to Egypt and later returned to Israel. He had a brother named James, really Yaakov or Jacob, whatever. He was known to be wise. He was known to be virtuous and godly. He was known as a teacher. He was known as a prophet. He had disciples, and he was therefore a rabbi himself. He founded a new community of brothers based on his teachings or his laws. He worked miracles, though his opponents said that he worked magic. It's by the power of Satan, by the power of Beelzebub that you cast out demons. They were saying that in the Gospels during Jesus' lifetime. Not surprising that approach to explaining his incredible success would continue to develop in the rabbinic tradition. He worked miracles, but it was through magic. Been saying that since the Gospels, since Jesus' life. His opponents said he led Israel astray. He was called the Christ. He claimed divinity. He was worshiped by his followers as God. He was condemned by a Jewish court. But then, oddly, he was crucified by a Roman governor. Condemned by a Jewish court, but killed by a Roman? Yes, and that's what the Gospels say. It's odd. We don't have any other examples from history that happened, and yet it happened to Jesus. And both texts, both sets of texts, New Testament texts and all this other stuff, the gospel of public domain, saying the same thing. His earthly followers said that he was raised from the dead, even third day, and he was perhaps the Messiah. In other words, every major point in Jesus' bio ends up being affirmed or confirmed, even in a backhanded kind of way, by these extra biblical sources. So it's not just, you can't even prove that Jesus even existed if you take the Bible off the table. Yeah, I can do a whole lot more than that. Actually, I can demonstrate that he did exist dozens of times in dozens of locations, And I can also demonstrate that every major bullet point of Jesus' biography is supported by texts, archaeology, and what have you, outside the Bible. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the nature of our faith. He presented himself alive, Acts 1:3, with many convincing, what's the word? Proofs. With many convincing proofs. See, our faith is not a faith that's based on philosophy or speculation. Our faith is based on evidence. It's based on reality. It's based on eyewitness testimony. And if that will not grow your faith, and if that will not inform your witness to people that you have a chance to impact, I'm not sure what will. Here's just a real quick, by the way, and we're going to go to break. We're going to go to break. When you study this stuff on site and you see it and the stuff is right in front of you, it's Horatio Spafford, it is well with my soul, moment after moment after moment after moment, multiple times every day when we're there. When faith becomes sight. And it should. There's no reason why it shouldn't. How about we take a break?
I got a question.
Please.
Dr. Nunnally, is Jesus' death by Roman crucifixion unique?
No.
In the sense that he was a Jewish man condemned by the Jewish authorities?
I wish we could say no. I wish we could say yes, it is unique. But no, it is not unique. We have a story during the siege of Jerusalem, for example. Josephus tells us about it in his History of the Jewish War, Book 5. And he says that more than 500 were being crucified, listen to this, every day. Each day, a new set of 500 victims, to the point that Josephus describes it like this. They couldn't even, after they'd cut every tree down for miles from Jerusalem, they couldn't find any more wood for the crosses. And even when they were able to scrap together enough wood, there wasn't enough space to put the crucified victims. So it would be nice.
But you would say the fact that he was condemned by the Sanhedrin, but not killed by the Sanhedrin, killed by the Romans instead.
That's quite unique. That's quite unique. Yeah, but both the biblical sources and this gospel according to the marketplace, this extra biblical or outside the Bible stuff, is telling the same story. Condemned by a group of Jews, turned over to Romans, and they're the ones who actually carried out the execution. Yeah, great. Thank you for helping me clarify where you were going with that. All right, can we take a break? House lights up so nobody trips. And 5 minutes, that's all I got.